Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade felt like ice against the column of his throat, a sharp, deadly promise that contrasted violently with the heat of the burning city outside. "Look at me," the conqueror commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, through the soles of the terrified courtier's shoes, and straight into the marrow of Elian's bones. Elian, the last surviving Omega of the fallen House of Vayne, forced his chin up. He did not tremble. He refused to give this barbarian the satisfaction of tasting his fear, even though the scent of burnt sugar, his own distress pheromones, was flooding the opulent, blood-splattered throne room. Above him stood General Silas, the Wolf of the North, a man whose sheer physical presence sucked the air out of the room. Silas was terrifying, a wall of scarred muscle and dark fur, draped in the black iron armor of the insurrectionists. But it was his eyes that stopped Elian's heart, gold, predatory, and eerily familiar. "They say the youngest prince was the only one with a soul," Silas murmured, leaning down. He pressed the tip of his bloodied sword under Elian's chin, forcing his head back until Elian was staring at the frescoed ceiling. "Tell me, little prince, does a soul bleed differently than a sinner?" The surrounding soldiers, rough men with grime in their beards and victory in their eyes, laughed. They were waiting for the order. The House of Vayne had starved the North for decades. Retribution was the only law here. "Do it," Elian whispered, his voice cracking but his gaze remaining defiant. "End it." Silas stared at him. For a moment, the sounds of looting and screaming from the corridors faded. The general's nostrils flared, inhaling the scent of the terrified Omega. Then, to the shock of his lieutenants and the horror of the court, Silas sheathed his sword with a sharp clack. "No," Silas declared, his voice ringing out. "Killing him is too easy. He will serve. Take him to my tent. If he spills a drop of wine, break a finger. If he tries to run, break his legs." Elian gasped as rough hands hauled him up. He looked back at Silas, expecting to see cruelty, but for a split second, he saw something else in those golden eyes. A desperate, terrifying hunger that had nothing to do with war. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation and survival. Elian, once the pampered jewel of the capital, was reduced to a body servant. He scrubbed armor until his fingers bled. He fetched water until his back ached. He slept on a rug at the foot of Silas's bed, listening to the general's steady breathing, terrified that the Alpha would wake and decide the punishment wasn't severe enough. Yet, there were inconsistencies. When a drunken lieutenant had cornered Elian near the supply wagons, leering and grabbing at his wrist, Silas had appeared out of the darkness like a wraith. He hadn't just reprimanded the soldier. He had beaten the man within an inch of his life, his growls animalistic and possessive. Afterwards, Silas had looked at Elian with a cold sneer. "You are my property," Silas had spat, wiping blood from his knuckles. "Do not let others touch what is mine. It insults me." It was a cruel explanation, fitting for a tyrant, but Elian noticed that from that night on, a guard was always posted shadow close to him, not to keep him in, but to keep others out. And then there was the food. The rations in the war camp were meager, hardtack, and dried venison. Yet, every evening, Elian would find a pristine, warm roll of white bread and a cut of roasted meat left on the small stool beside his sleeping rug. Silas never acknowledged it. If Elian thanked him, Silas would merely grunt and turn over, feigning sleep. It was maddening. It was confusing. It sparked a memory Elian couldn't quite place, buried under 10 years of trauma and snow. The answer came on the night of the winter solstice. The army had taken the high pass, settling into the captured winter palace. Outside, a blizzard raged, the wind howling like dying spirits. Inside the general's chambers, the fire roared. Elian was pouring wine into a silver goblet, his hands shaking slightly from the chill that seemed to seep through the stone walls. Silas sat in a high-backed chair watching him. The general was out of his armor, wearing only a loose linen shirt open at the chest, revealing a roadmap of scars. "You are shivering," Silas noted. It wasn't a question. "The winter is harsh, General," Elian replied softly, keeping his eyes lowered. "Come here." Elian froze. This was it. The moment he had dreaded. He placed the jug down and walked slowly toward the chair. He stopped arm's length away. "Closer." Elian stepped between the alpha's spread knees. The heat radiating from Silas was intoxicating. A scent of pine, wood smoke, and rain. A true alpha scent that made Elian's inner omega whine in confusion. Silas reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping around Elian's waist. But instead of pulling him down, Silas simply held him there, looking up into his face. "Do you remember the winter of the red frost?" Silas asked quietly. Elian blinked. "That was 10 years ago. I was only a child. 12 years old. The famine was at its peak," Silas continued, his thumb rubbing circles against the fabric of Elian's tunic. "The king, your father, locked the granaries. People were eating boiled leather in the lower city. Orphans froze in the gutters." "I know," Elian whispered, shame coloring his tone. "I know what my family did." "There was a boy," Silas said, his eyes drifting to the fire. "A street rat. He was dying behind the royal stables. He had given up. The cold had taken his toes. Hunger had taken his mind. He was waiting for the end." Elian's breath hitched. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The snow was knee-deep. He had snuck out of the palace kitchens, hiding a bundle under his velvet cloak. He had found the boy curled behind the hay bales, eyes wild and golden, teeth bared like a cornered animal. "I remember," Elian breathed. "I brought him food, hot bread, honey roast from the king's table. I gave him my cloak." Silas looked back at him. The hardness in his face melted, revealing a depth of emotion so raw it made Elian's knees weak. "You didn't just give him food, Elian. You fed him every day for a month. You stole from your father's own plate. You sat in the snow in your fine silks and told him stories so he wouldn't fall asleep and freeze." Silas took Elian's hand and pressed it against his own cheek. "You told that boy that he was strong, that he was a wolf who would one day survive the winter." Elian stared, tears pricking his eyes. "You? But why didn't you say anything? Why did you humiliate me? You made me a servant. You put a blade to my throat." Silas's expression hardened again, a shadow passing over his features. "Look at my court, Elian. Look at my generals. They are butchers. They hate the name Vayne. They want your blood to water the fields. If I had shown you mercy, if I had treated you as a prince or a lover, they would have slit your throat in the night to save me from your influence." Silas stood up, towering over Elian. The power dynamic shifted instantly. He was no longer the boy in the snow. He was the conqueror. But his touch was gentle as he cupped Elian's face. "I had to break you publicly so I could save you privately. I had to claim you as a slave so no one would dare question my right to keep you alive. I made you mine in the lowest way, so I could eventually make you mine in the highest way." Elian's heart hammered against his ribs. "And now, Silas said, his voice dropping to a husky growl. "The purge is over. My loyalists control the palace. The dissenters are gone." Silas moved back to the table and picked up a heavy object wrapped in velvet. He unwrapped it. It wasn't a weapon. It was the crown of the North, a circlet of dark iron and sapphires. "I never wanted a throne," Silas admitted. "I only wanted to be strong enough to ensure you never had to steal bread in the snow again." He held the crown out, not to place it on his own head, but offering it to Elian. "This kingdom is broken," Silas said. "I can conquer, I can kill, I can burn, but I cannot heal it. You were the only one who showed kindness when the world was cruel. You are the king they need." Elian looked at the crown, then at the man who had torn the world apart just to find his way back to a childhood promise. "I cannot rule alone," Elian said, his voice gaining strength. He reached out, not for the crown, but for Silas's hand, interlacing their fingers. The sheep need a shepherd, Silas. But the shepherd needs a wolf to guard the flock. Silas let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. He dropped the crown onto the table with a heavy thud, disregarding the symbol of power completely. He pulled Elian into his arms, burying his face in the Omega's neck, inhaling deeply. "Then command me," Silas whispered against his skin, the vibration sending shivers down Elian's spine. "My sword, my armai, my life. It was always yours. Since the day you gave me a crust of bread and called me strong." Elian wrapped his arms around the Alpha's broad shoulders, closing his eyes as the warmth of the fire and the man enveloped him. The fear of the executioner's blade was gone, replaced by the unbreakable bond of a debt paid in full, and a love that had survived the frost. And that is how the wolf returned to the hand that fed him, not to bite, but to kneel. If you enjoyed seeing Silas reveal his true devotion, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who humiliated you to save your life? Or is the deception unforgivable? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,